Pavilions flutter around in the consciousness of architects and of patrons. They cause a unique attraction. They have an almost fatal attraction. They are a way of expressing physically ideas. And those ideas can be of many kinds. Some of them are about the possibilities of new forms of architecture. And since, coincidentally, when Naomi first spoke to me about this, Flo Watson and I were beginning to work on an edition of AD, the International Design magazine, which is titled Pavilions, Parasols and Pop-Ups. And the whole idea behind that is to ask whether in the current generation of pavilions and the like, there is some sign of a new architecture, a new attitude towards architecture appearing. And that new attitude to architecture might well be predicated around the new forms of communication that we engage in. And I have to say that on the several occasions that I've been down to the pavilion, very few people seem to have been talking directly to each other, but they have been texting each other under the shelter of the pavilion. And it's interesting that a city such as Seville has created a massive parasol, which is a giant pavilion with no particular function, an open structure which can be programmed in all sorts of different ways. And of course what we've been experiencing here with the MPavilion is exactly that, a structure which can then be infused with all sorts of different activities, events, discussions and explorations. Just before thinking about what I might say this morning, I remembered the triangular pavilion, the triangular folly at Rushton Hall in Northamptonshire. And I don't know whether anyone's seen this extraordinary little building, but it is triangular in plan, and each face has three of everything, 3 windows, 3 gables. The architect, the client, were obsessed with tripolarity. It's a building which is very dear to my heart because I believe every good architectural argument is one which is in the context of a battle with 2 other arguments in the same area. Tripolarity seems to lie behind all of the most creative things we do. And maybe that gives me the opportunity to invite Sean to come to the front, and I'll move over to the side and join him and ask him things about pavilions. So Sean, I wanted to start by asking you about what happens between the time when you have an idea, pick up a pencil, because I know you work with pencils, pick up a pencil and start drawing something, and what happens to that idea when, after all of that investigation through the hand and the eye, it eventually manifests itself as a concrete object?
That's a tough question on a Saturday morning. Well, hopefully the idea gets better. I think if you can get the diagram of a building right, regardless of the scale of the building, then you're pretty set. And so the way I work is I reasonably rigorously test the diagram that I've arrived at by exploring the detail that might be invested into the diagram as it evolves. If your diagram's wrong, your building will be wrong, and the diagram can be drawn usually on a tiny piece of paper. And if your building's wrong, you've got a much bigger problem, because typically, although this is an exception, this building that we're in, typically the buildings tend to stay there. So if they stay there and they're wrong, you kind of got to pack up and leave town. So that test at that level is critical. And for example, Leon is also a client at the Design Hub. There's a box full of the diagrams until the right diagram was there. Once the diagram's right, it becomes obvious. And usually there's a lot of yelling and screaming and swearing to get to the right diagram. then there's an equal amount of yelling and screaming to say, why didn't I get to this diagram straight away? But architecture is not like that. Anyone who thinks architecture is a flash of genius and the architect sort of rises above the floor and levitates and does these amazing things, and they're completely misguided. It's just a slog from that point.
I have to say that yelling and screaming takes place in private, not in front of the client.
Never.
Yeah.
No.
No. So Sean, I mean, it's not the first pavilion you've done. In a sense, you've done quite a few little projects which seem to be precursors to things that you then subsequently do. There was the famous container that you worked on for a while, which in a sense was a pavilion, which led to something else. And then there's also that park bench that you did, which is a kind of a tiny pavilion. Do you see these pavilions as things that actually generate a new era in your work?
That is topical, because over the holidays, for some mystical reason, a big shelving unit in my archive collapsed, and it crushed a lot of stuff. And yesterday, my brother came down to the office to try and help me right the fallen shelving unit, which we couldn't manage to do. And he looked in and said, "Is this all your work?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "There's a lot of it." And I said, "Yeah, there is a lot, because when you're making a living doing architecture, like actually building buildings, you do a lot of stuff, and a lot of it doesn't get a lot of airtime. The spectacular and the award-winning stuff is what people know, but for every one of those, there's 10 others that might be a house alteration or an intervention. And those little projects, the bus shelter house was right over the road in front of the Mouse Hole as part of the Fringe Festival a while ago. Those things inform each other. And right now in the office, we've got two tiny projects. One's a little coffee thing at Sunshine Station. It's a $50,000 pod. They're just as important as... You want me to shut up, do you?
Your time's up.
Oh, what? So already? We just got started.
So Naomi, you should be here. Yes, we have. The bell went.
Anyway, what I was going to say was that those little projects are just as important as the big ones.